summer of 1930, the Great Plains of the United States entered an unusually dry period. The next 10 years saw a series of droughts that made the history books as being the worst on record. Due to the land rush of the 1890s, large portions of the plains had been plowed and sowed with crops. The grassland could not support the volume of farming. Due to the poor nature of the soil and the lack of rain, crops began to fail, and the dry, fine soil was picked up by the wind. This entire area earned the nickname the Dust Bowl. Farmers of the area were particularly hard hit by this phenomenon. The drought made farming crops difficult, and the constant fine dust hung in the air, both inside and out, making life miserable. Darrell Proctor spent his childhood in this environment. Listen to him speak about some of the lengths people went to keep dust out of their houses.
So we had been in this period of dust storms for several years, and each year they seemed to get worse. And of course, the dust would come along, and it would pick up what was there, and they had started to cultivate the sand and the topsoil, and it got loose, and then the wind would come along and pick it up and blow it around, and it was not the nicest thing in the world. And it would get very, very dark. I think, as I mentioned before, it would get so dark that the chickens would think it was nighttime, and they would go to roost, like chickens do when it gets night. And what you did was when you washed the dishes, and whoever was drying them would turn the plates upside down on the table so they wouldn't fill up with dirt. So you wouldn't get dirt in your food. Sometimes people would take bed sheets and soak them in water, and they would hang them over the windows with the hope that they would attract some of the dust and so on. All it did was make muddy sheets, but people felt good about doing it. Maybe it did some good. But
one of the most serious complications of this phenomenon was called dust pneumonia. Residents of the area would breathe in fine particles of dust, which would reach the alveoli of their lungs, causing difficulty breathing and sometimes death. Children were particularly susceptible to this disease. Darrell Proctor was 4 when he contracted it.
Then people started to get sick, and they started to get what they call the black pneumonia. And people, if they had a tendency to get sick from it, they'd be coughing up black dirt and stuff like that. Why they took me to the doctor, I don't know, because it just was not our habit to go to the doctor. But in any case, they took me, and he gave me some kind of medicine. It was obviously a patent medicine, and I know I couldn't read at that time. In any case, I went to your mother, and I got in her lap, and I showed her the bottle. I said, "What does it say?" And she looked at it, and she said, "It says pink pills for pale people." And that was the miracle drug I took. My mother, who by this time, she'd put up with me a number of years, and she didn't have a lot of patience with me. And so she got the idea. She said, if you had fresh air, it'll probably help you. Well, the only thing is the fresh air was mixed up with fresh sand. But anyway, this started like in March, and out in West Texas, it is cold as the dickens at that time of the year, and it'd freeze every night. But she would wrap me in a quilt and leave me on the front porch for the day. And she may have been right. It may have been that which kept me from cashing in my chips, but it was very cold out there, and it was not entertaining.
The Dust Bowl was largely ignored by politicians until the mid-1930s, when the severity of the dust storms, also known as black blizzards, grew too difficult to ignore. Dust storms that once confined themselves to the plains began to sweep east as far as Washington, D.C. On April 14, 1935, a dust storm known as Black Sunday began in the Oklahoma Panhandle. By 7:20 p.m., it had hit Amarillo, Texas. In some places, visibility was 0. By the mid-1930s, lawmakers began to study the problem and offered incentives to farmers who followed new methods of farming meant to reduce erosion and retain water. Some farmers earned as much as $1 per acre to employ these techniques. Regular rainfall finally returned to the area in 1939, ending the drought and the era referred to as the Dirty Thirties.